Hey there, folks, and welcome back into the Northern Futbol Podcast. Ben Steiner alongside Brendan Dunlop and Alex Gongier-Ruzic. And a big week in Canadian soccer. We're recording this as the Canadian women's national team is up against China in Casey Stoney's debut, but a big week on the men's national team as well. And, I mean, you can just start in the Champions League with how insane it was for the men's national team and men's national team players there. Alphonso Davies, of course, eliminating Alistair, Johnston, Celtic. But we'll get into that in a moment. Two friendlies for Canada. They're up against Romania and Wales come September, and two solid tests for Canada, a top 30 nation in Wales as of the current FIFA rankings and a top 40 team in Romania. Brendan, what do you think of these tests for Jesse Marsh and the Canadian men's national team?
Well, we've come a long way from Japan and Curacao, boys. We've come a long way.
Well, Japan, I take. Curacao, I mean, yeah, I guess that's a fair shot.
Japan again, though, I feel like I don't need Japan again. I feel like two times in the last 4 years. Wasn't Herman in charge for both of those games against Japan? I feel
Biello was in charge for one.
I don't need that. Oh, Biello had the one. That's right. That might have been his first one, actually.
Yeah.
I don't need to see Japan again. So no, I think Romania and Wales are two different tests for them. I think we've all wanted to see Canada against more European opposition. That seems like a pretty good tier. And obviously it's September and it's friendlies, and those two have other objectives. So it's not, I think, a total measurement of where Canada stands. But the reality is we haven't seen this Canadian men's national team against enough European opposition to really base it on. So that's a pretty good booking for September, considering how difficult it is for Canada soccer and the two other host nations for 2026 to be able to book some friendlies. I'm happy that Kevin Blue and company pulled that off.
Brendan, not a fan of Kaoru Mutomo and his thesis of dribbling.
I think it's also good that they're up against teams that are kind of where they are in the world ranking as well. Because as much as it was exciting to play the Netherlands and to play France, those games you're just defending the whole time. You're attacking on the counter. You're trying to kind of tread water in those games, as much as Canada has done well in those games against some of the best teams in the world, including the best team in the world in Argentina. But you're not always going toe-to-toe, 50-50 possession split. That's what this team needs more of, to learn how to play with those teams, because in a 48-team World Cup as well, you're going to play some of those teams that are right around you in the FIFA World Ranking. And if you only know how to play against better opposition, you're not necessarily getting better against the teams that you should beat. And that's what these games are going to be able to achieve. But when you look at these two opponents as well, Alex, Wales, Romania, what do you see as them as opponents, and how are they going to test Canada?
Yeah, well, I mean, to the point about the test, I would disagree in terms of level, because you saw it at the World Cup. Wales drew the U.S. Romania, they had a good Euros last time around. One of the surprises, I would argue, they're similar to some of the tests Canada already get in the likes of U.S., Mexico, et cetera, and CONCACAF. What the big plus is, you get a bit of something different stylistically. You get European. Especially Wales, they've got a unique style, a unique group of guys, more known for their chemistry as a group that's really improved over the last 10, 15 years, even if Gareth Bale's not around anymore. And ditto with Romania. They've got some fantastic young talents coming up that are making waves in Europe. So I think that's what's most exciting about these tests, is that it's, a level that Canada knows they can compete at, but it's something different. Because to your point, I do agree that these are the teams that you're going to have to beat. Some of these teams if you're going to get out of your group at a World Cup. Yes, you're going to have to beat the Frances and Argentinas and all that if you want to make a deep run. And I think Canada will have to find time in their schedule to get more tests like that, because I think they need it. But in terms of stylistic differences, Romania, immediately I just think back to the Euros, and they've got fun technical players. They're going to want to play on the front foot. It's going to be a good test in that regard. And then Wales, I just think of how solid they can be defensively, organized, compact, and they really gave the U.S. fits in that World Cup game, even though it was 3 years ago now. And of course, Gareth Bale won't be around for this one.
And other CanMNT news as well. The U17 men's national team is off to the U20 World Cup as they qualified with relative ease, albeit a narrow scare against Bermuda, putting in some dominating offensive performances along the way in the CONCACAF qualifiers. Any takeaways from the performances of what looked like a fun youth national team for the Canadian men?
No, it looked like they were having a lot of fun, and it looks like it's a youth group that seems inspired and maybe a little extra motivated. I think in tournaments past, there was this kind of feeling of like, oh, we hope we can perform well, like, oh, we hope we can get to the next level, and there wasn't as much belief. But as we've seen since Jesse Marsh has arrived, and with this crop of players for the senior men's team, I genuinely feel like that kind of belief is spreading down. And I think a lot of it has to do with, the organization and some of the competence involved in this as well. It's easy to look at them and be like, oh, they're wearing the old jerseys. They're not kicking them back for, the U14s to wear anymore. And I think that you're going to start to see kind of that disappear as part of how Canada Soccer used to operate before. And look, Kevin Blue and Jesse Marsh have spoken about how important the youth levels are for the future of the game in this country, let alone, the immediate future of the men's national team. So the better that these groups can be supported both on and off the pitch, the better I think they'll start to perform on the pitch. So this is a great first step. Getting to the World Cup is going to be, a once in a lifetime experience for quite a few of those players. So it's pretty special to get to do that.
Yeah, lots to take away from this. I mean, one big one, it's worth noting this very weird format they've tested out this year. Like, this isn't typical like the old CONCACAF U17 championships, where Canada, usually if you're along the way, you'll get a US, you'll get a Mexico, you'll get one of the big dogs. They were split into like 6 weird groups based on seeding, and you just had to win your group to go. CONCACAF has something ridiculous, like 7 spots at this World Cup, 8. So Canada got one of those. So that's why it's hard to know how much they were tested, like how good are actually these teams like Bermuda, Curacao, because they dominated them so easily. At the same time, you can only dominate what's in front of them. And I think what stood out is sometimes Canada's struggled to score at youth levels, and this team was scoring for fun when they got going through the gears. Like, they had guys who can fill the net. Just, in games I watched, Marius Ayanero scored a great hat trick, a 16-year-old playing for LAFC 2. Andrea Ligaya-Sparad was a guy that a lot of people were excited about, playing in a Spanish academy. Shola Jima, of course, we know well from York, score some nice goals and have some good moments. Richard Chukwu, we've seen already play for various Canadian teams. He was putting in big performances at the back. Kevin Kahn, Feyenoord Academy, scored some great goals. Like, there was a lot of fun offensive talent at work. So we'll now have to see how things go at the U17 World Cup, because Canada actually has done well to get to the U17 World Cup. This is one of the age levels they've done well at, but they struggled at the recent actual World Cups, like the last one in 2023. They had some close calls, but ultimately they were pretty outclassed and were left wanting a lot more from that tournament. So can they actually head to the World Cup this year and make some noise? Hopefully, now that they've qualified, they can find a way to get some more camps, continue to build this chemistry. So it's definitely a good start.
And from Matt Paternostra, it seems like the Canadian men's U23s have some friendlies on the schedule for March. Considering this would be a completely different group from the last time we saw them, how could this roster look, and who would you like to see, as well as who could potentially coach this team, Alex?
I'd go right away to one name, well, in the sense that, like, Mauro Biello seems to, just in the sense of someone adjacent to Jesse Marsh, because with the U23s, if I'm not mistaken, I could be completely wrong, and we can discuss about this next week, but I think the Olympic format's going to stay the same within CONCACAF, where they use the U20s to qualify for, like, there isn't going to be a U23 tournament. So when I see this, I wonder if this is Jesse Marsh maybe just opening up an avenue for more players to be seen. And if anything, I'd argue Jesse Marsh could be a great head coach for this if that's the case. But assuming he'll have a lot on his plate with Nations League, obviously some big games in March, I do wonder if having one of his assistants, such as Mauro Biello, who's already familiar, could make a lot of sense. And it could be something where Marsh is around, Marsh is, given instructions. Marsh has definitely got his hands on the camp, because I think that would be the lone benefit of a U23 camp at the moment, is maybe starting to get a look at guys for the Gold Cup, guys for that, who just might fall out of the picture for a Nations League where it's going to be a smaller squad and a more fixed objective.
Paul Stalteri has been a guy who's spent, quite a few different jobs now as like a number 2, number 3, and I wonder if he wants to be a number 1. This would be a pretty good opportunity. And to Alex's point, if that's not going to be the format going forward, where they actually use a U23 team to qualify, then I think it'd be a good opportunity to give Stalteri, the chance to have that top coach experience and work with that group of players. So either way, I don't think they can go wrong with those two.
We'll jump into our Canadians abroad as well. We briefly mentioned the Champions League before, but Alphonso Davies made an accelerated return from injury, and it came at the perfect time. Not only did he return in time for the second leg of Bayern against Celtic, giving us the full CanMNT fullback duel with Alistair Johnston, but he had a decisive impact, of course, scoring in the last second to send Bayern Munich through to the round of 16. Certainly just a fantastic game all around and a fantastic performance over 2 legs for Alistair Johnston as well.
Man, that was so fun to watch. I'm very happy that Alistair Johnston was able to, perform at that level. I think we all felt for him when he collapsed to the ground, just some 6 or 8 feet away from Alphonso Davies, who put that ball into the net and then did the big emphatic badge kiss and reminded Bayern Munich supporters exactly why he was worth the money. Obviously, it would have been harder to make a mess of that given the position that he was in. But it seemed quite fitting that I want someone from the next core generation that will be a key piece of Bayern's core for the next 10 years, pulls them out of what was a situation they probably shouldn't have been in. Celtic had played very, very well. They didn't park the bus. They didn't sit back. Like they went out to score, and they were unlucky not to be in front by maybe 3 goals by halftime. Celtic, they had their opportunities. They played really, really inspired, brave and bold football, which you love to see from an underdog, which they very much were on paper. And then, to get the all-Canadian matchup, albeit for just 20 minutes and change, that we didn't think we were going to get because of the hamstring injury to Alphonso Davies. Pretty amazing that he's the headliner in the end.
So it couldn't have gone a lot better from a Canadian perspective if you look at all the boxes. I mean, first off, I think I'll start with Alistair Johnston just because he deserves his flowers, and I think it was really cool to see people really realize who maybe haven't been paying as much attention to Celtic, because you're not always paying attention to the Scottish League. Even when they're playing in Champions League, there's usually bigger headliners on the day stealing the show in terms of big games. This is that felt like the vibe that a lot of people are getting introduced to Johnston in a Celtic shirt for the first time. What a way to do so. Like, he was just talk about a tough assignment. You get all the wingers they have. I think it was Serge Gnabry to start on the left side. Ineffective. Coleman comes in the second half. That's the guy who scored a Champions League winning goal. No problem. Johnston had him locked down, made a beautiful slide tackle in the box, was just everywhere on him. Also got forward a few times, was making dangerous attacks. It was just a perfect all-around game, and this is huge because Johnston showed I can play at that level. For a guy who we wonder with his, Northern Irish passport, if he could be an option for a UK team to look out, potentially one in the Premier League, given his pedigree. This showed that, okay, I could go up against the level of a Bayern Munich and all their talent and not look out of place. So that was a win. The second win is Alphonso Davies' health, because I remember reading a headline on Canadian Soccer Daily when it came out, and it was very valid because this is I've seen this experience in my fantasy team too many times. Hamstring injuries. Usually it's 6 to 8 weeks. Whatever Alphonso Davies has taken, I'd love for a few guys in my fantasy team Premier League to get that, but for him to come back in 3 weeks is insane. It's remarkable. Given Bayern's doctors, I trust this. Hopefully he can build on this, and this isn't too early, but it's great that he's back. And lastly, the fact he scored another big Champions League goal between now, the one he scored last year against Real Madrid. Maybe there's going to be a little more confidence now from a Vincent Kompany. Not saying that Kompany doesn't have confidence in him. He has a lot of confidence, but almost to be like, look, go in the box a little more. Like, get a little, play a little more inverted, shoot. Like, don't be scared to get involved offensively. Because we see sometimes with Davies, there's moments where he defers, and naturally so. When you look up, you have Harry Kane, you got Kimmich, you got Coman, Elise. You want to pass the ball, but I noticed in this game there was a moment before Davies scored. He took a shot where I was like, oh, okay, I like that he had the cojones, I guess, to take that shot on in that moment. I wonder if this is going to be good for his confidence to show that he can be one of those guys too, attacking wise, even though sometimes he almost likes to defer.
What would Mauricio Pochettino call Alphonso Davies in that circumstance, given what Diego Luna did in the Champions or the Nations League earlier this year? Not going to say it. Okay, we'll leave our listeners to go search up Mauricio Pochettino on Diego Luna earlier this year. And
that's the only time that Diego Luna and Alphonso Davies will be mentioned in the same breath, by the way. But I see what you did there, Ben, and I liked it. I will say this about Davies and Kingsley Coman. I think a lot of times I watch Coman play and I think, damn, man, I'd love to see Davies trusted in that position, because I think that they're very, very similar players. The difference is that Davies has been optimized in a different position to allow both of them to be on the pitch at the same time. Their partnerships on that left side, it doesn't work the same way as we've seen the Canadian partnerships that Jesse Marsh has experimented with, and I would like to see that a little bit more. One last point on Alistair Johnston, who I thought was incredible. It's unfortunate we were denied so many Davies Johnston one-on-one battles because Callum McGregor kept coming over so far. I don't know if he was just like, look, you take Coleman because I can't get there, but I'll take Davies for you. There was a couple of times like, come on, Captain, let Johnston get a chance at Davies there. So that was a takeaway from me.
And Théo Bair also had a big week, given a rare start for Auxerre, his first since late 2024 and first Ligue 1 start since November 3rd. And he made the most of it, assisting in an entertaining 2-2 draw against Brest. Alex, what do you see from Théo Bair this week?
I just want to say, I mean, I know I get spoiled sometimes. I end up watching a lot of these random mid-table games. Like this might have been one of the best games I've seen in a few months for whatever reason. Brest Auxerre, just like two teams, middle of the table in France. Brest, of course, Champions League campaign, great Champions League campaign for them. It's probably going to come to an end, if not in a matter of minutes, because PSG's got a strong advantage. But they just went out and played their football that they maybe haven't always been able to play this year, that they played a lot last year. Auxerre, nothing to lose. They're trying to fight for survival. They went out. It was a slugfest. So it was great for Théo Bair. He had some great chances. He actually missed a chip that he probably is going to want back. He went with his left. He's more of a righty. Maybe he's thinking he could have taken a little more time. But it was just great to see him active, involved. He made the great header, great heads up play for him to win 2 balls. He won the first one and then nodded it down for his teammate. Because it's been tough for him for Auxerre, just in terms of it's a different level. You're coming in as a new guy. There are high expectations. So for him to show well, it was a good vote of confidence for him, his coach, and hopefully they can find ways to start him more often, because his profile causes problems. He's big, he's quick. In terms of those Ligue 1 defenders, they struggle to deal with them at times. And now that he's already scored in Ligue 1, so that's not something he's working towards. He just needs more reps, and this kind of confidence builder strikers need.
And a bit of a fun story as well. After spending the first half of the season as a free agent, Steve Vittoria was one of 9 signings by Boavista last week, which include Levin Kurzawa, as they make a desperate bid to avoid relegation. This won't be of note for the Canadian men's national team, unlikely unless he has some sort of world-changing second half of the season. But one has to imagine that CPL teams will be calling him as soon as his contract ends to see if he could make attempted return home. But Brendan, 9 players mid-season to try and save relegation. Not something you'd see for TFC to fix the problem, but just insane.
Definitely not. Some context, though, is that the Boavista were banned from participating in the last 5 transfer windows. So this is the first time that they were able to, and this is part of the reason why they're in such bad league form. And so they went with a bunch of free agent veterans here to raise the level considerably from the academy, maybe far too soon promoted academy graduates that they have filling out the ranks. So Kurzawa, Steven Vittoria, you wouldn't have expected to see that, on any team, let alone a team at the bottom of the Portuguese table. But I like it for Vittoria. And, you've made that comment before about CPL teams calling these guys. The CPL's in a different place now. He's in a different place. I can't see that happening. What happened is the only scenario I thought would happen for Steven Vittoria if he was going to continue his career. Was some Portuguese team at lower end of the table desperate for his veteran presence and maybe penalty kick taking, and Boavista definitely need that.
That's at the same time, to the CPL point, like, I think you can make the call. Like, say for Cavalry, Eric Kobza, he was fantastic in the Champions Cup. Maybe there's a move upwards for him, similar like a Joel Waterman. Reminds me a lot of that in terms of profiles, very similar. Maybe you're sitting there being like, look, we just had a great Champions Cup run, so we're playing in CONCACAF against big teams. Could you not want to come be a part of that in 2026, a part of another Champions Cup run, be a part of that, play on grass, which is a big thing given Vittoria's injury history. Like, I do wonder if there's some sort of call that could be made. I don't think it's every club. Like, I can't see Vittoria going to a Valor, a Vancouver, some of these clubs, but Cavalry is probably one of the ones that could be positioned to make a call in the right scenario. But to the Boavista point, I just got to chuckle at this because I got the FootMob notification being like Vittoria joined Boavista. Is this just me, or like this screams like a tax situation? Like, I know the fiscal year is coming up in Boavista. Maybe they had a surplus in the accounts. Like, we got to spend it before the fiscal year is over. And they decided to go like full football manager and just signed the 9 highest valuable guys that were willing to answer their sporting director's call. Like, some about this seems a little fishy, I can't lie.
Well, Chelsea kind of did the same thing. They didn't sign 9 players, and I can't name a single free agent, but it was the day after the transfer window closed. Their ban was over. They made some signings on February 2nd or whatever it was a few years ago. And now we're talking pre-pandemic here. But it's not uncommon for teams in that situation. I think what is uncommon is a team like Boavista are in the top flight, having not been able to participate in the market in 5 windows. So it's just amazing that they've found enough of these guys with the varied experience that they found. I mean, Kurzawa and Vitoria were both, very seasoned and very valuable and relied upon internationals not too long ago. So it's a good win for them.
And quietly as well, Owen Goodman has been putting in some top performances for AFC Wimbledon in League 2 as they push for promotion. Could the 21-year-old Crystal Palace loanee be an underdog in the race for third keeper for the men's national team? That's a question Tom had in our IG comments.
I like this question. It was a good one. I saw it. I figured may as well save it for the show because since then, Goodman went out and had a clean sheet in a big Wimbledon game. I think like they're third or second in the table now. They're pushing for promotion. He's just 21, which, as we remember, for keeper, especially, we see it a lot in the English pyramid where guys will get loan. Like, remember Dean Henderson, the guy ahead of Goodman at Palace right now, where it just took forever for him to get his spot. But once they get it, there's a different patience. I just wonder, like, Palace clearly rate him very highly. They have a plan for Goodman. If he makes a step next year to, say, the championship, because based on what he's done this year, helping them get promoted, I could wonder if a championship club who needs a keeper calls Crystal Palace to get him on loan. You have to be interested if you're Canada, because he's a very unique profile. Huge goalkeeper, really fills the net. So I think when you look at the options in the race, like Sirois, Isaac Boehmer is someone, if he gets a bigger role, you can't help but look at him. James Pantemis, you can throw his name in. Tom McGill. Goodman offers something different with his size. So it is something worth keeping an eye on. I don't think right now, just let him finish the season with Wimbledon, lots of confidence. But if his next move this summer, likely a loan, could really well dictate if we see him in the Canadian fold ahead of 2026.
And we'll jump into MLS as well. Of course, MLS is back this week. The Vancouver Whitecaps with a new coach, Toronto FC with a new coach, CF Montreal with a new coach. And we'll start off with the Whitecaps. A question from Herbert McCullough. Any update on the Vancouver Whitecaps ownership dilemma? As a TFC fan, I have a lot of respect for the Whitecaps. They're the oldest active Canadian football club and shaped North American football since the NASL. Not having them in MLS would be devastating for Canada, Brendan.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like there's any new update. I will say this, that, over the Christmas period, I had heard that there are 2 very prominent sport interest financial services groups that had spoken with both the Vancouver Whitecaps and CF Montreal, one of which was in far more advanced conversations than the other. By advanced, I just mean that there were heavily paid lawyers involved in those negotiations and conversations, but there's nothing really further beyond that. But yeah, it's both ownership groups have been involved with interested parties that seem very, very interested in relocation. So really hasn't gone beyond those conversations from what I know. But yeah, we all speculated and feared very much that those would be conversations that were being had, particularly once the Whitecaps publicly put themselves up for sale. And I think I've said on this show before that I think that has a lot to do with maybe some of the not so public conversations that CF Montreal may have been having, and Vancouver want to make sure that they're in that possible cash out opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, for the Whitecaps, they've said it, and it sounds, when you talk around, you hear like they've been committed to wanting to keep the team in Vancouver. They want to find some sort of local ownership angle. And we'll see how things go. But from what I've heard, and this isn't really my story at all, so I don't have much to say on it. But it sounds like there's been good discussions about solutions, I guess you could say, that see the team remain in Vancouver with some sort of involvement of local ownership. That's the goal. I think the Whitecaps have made that very clear. I think it would be surprising to see anything, but I think, given, again, 2026, everything around that's not surprising. So I guess the big thing is these things can drag out. So I'm just curious to know, like, what's going to be the timeline here? Is this going to be something that we're sitting here in June, like, wow, that was quick? new ownership process is out, or this could be something we're still talking about in 2027. That's how these things played out. And I think that's why the Whitecaps did the timing they did. They want to get this out early so that they're not in, it doesn't feel like they're in as much of a rush. I know there's some jokes and some talks about the team maybe being ready for a sale with a lighter spend in the off season, but they've since gone on and they splashed 7 figures on Emmanuel Sabi. Like, it's not a lot, but that's not something like that doesn't scream a team that's, cutting pennies, so to speak. Yes, they sold Armstrong, but that was a player that wanted to leave. So I'll be curious to see how long this one plays out.
When you're looking at this Whitecaps team, of course, the ownership situation offers a lot of inconsistencies and unknowns approaching this season as well, but they've been able to bring in Emmanuel Sabi, who looks to be out for the start of the season with an injury. Daniel Rios signed from Chivas Guadalajara, not Chivas USA, as I was about to say. But he seems like he could be a solid addition given his experience in both MLS and Liga MX. But Brendan, what do you see with this Whitecaps team heading into the 2025 MLS season, as well as the CONCACAF Champions Cup?
I think they're in a better situation maybe than when they ended last season. Obviously, having a new voice, I think, brings a different level of accountability for everybody in the room there. I think there's really only kind of 2 players that feel as though they're safe, and they both seem to be pretty motivated guys in general. And I'm referring to Ryan Gauld and Brian White. I don't think that they feel that they have to put any more blood, sweat, and tears into the project. I think that they've shown that they're putting a lot out there. And in terms of Gauld, it's the organization's responsibility to support his talent and his levels of performances. And I think that they've attempted to do a pretty good job to replace what they lost last year. I've said on the show that I think filling the void left by Fafa Picault would be very, very difficult. And it might be, especially if Sabi's not playing. But with Armstrong and Picault gone, they've brought in these 2 guys with potential. On paper, it looks like they're pretty good replacements. So they're not starting the season in a hole, and that's different from years past. And that's different from how most Canadian teams on lower budgets seem to operate.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have too much to say to add to what Brendan's point is, but it is worth noting that while it feels like they've taken a step back because you lose an Armstrong, I think it's worth noting that the Armstrong loss was more felt like him being at full strength felt like he could help the team level up easily from where they were last year. But if you take him out the equation, they're very comparable to the team that finished 8th, probably should have finished closer to 6th, 5th. Like, you look at, they lost Pico, but I think the Daniel Rios in particular is a big one. Yes, he's a depth striker, but they didn't have anyone to replace Brian White last year. It was run Brian White until he was exhausted. And when he was injured, you felt the noticeable difference. Now they have a number 9 who's scored 7 goals in MLS last year, 7 goals the year before. That's going to make a big, big difference in terms of just being able to rest Brian White. And if Brian White gets more US calls, okay, you have a guy who's got experience, who's able to step up, because Damir Krylak, it just wasn't the right fit last year. Between Jaden Nelson and Emmanuel Sabi, you'd expect them to fill the Fafa Pico shoes as well. Ali Ahmed playing further forward in preseason, looking very good. They've lost some guys like Schopf and Raposo, who will, key losses, but I think they've done well to replace them. Like, really now, like, I think this is a team that should still, if all goes well, comfortably make the playoffs. The question is, how high is their ceiling? And that'll depend on Jesper Sorensen. How quickly can he adjust to MLS? It's not easy to adjust to MLS. A lot of the coaches that have had success tend to be in their 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th season. So can Sorensen buck that trend? Can you get steps forward from Ahmed and Vite? Big question marks, but I think their floor is maybe a little higher than we realize in all this. And hey, they still have some room to play with. There's been a lot of talk out there of them maybe adding a 3rd DP now or in the summer. I know Manuel Veth reported that they're looking at attacking midfielder as soon as possible. If they hit on that signing, all of a sudden their ceiling improves more. It's just if they do it in the summer, I'll be curious to see where they're at when that signing comes in, because they're going to need a lot of things to hit to be in the right position.
And we'll jump into CF Montreal as well. Of course, consistency on the bench with CF Montreal. Laurent Courtois returning for another year, but maybe a bit of an underwhelming offseason. A lot of changes for CF Montreal, but it seems like, and we spoke about it earlier, that they've picked up a lot of just kind of random pieces, and you don't really know how this team's going to come together. They've got a great kit, and we'll get into kits after, but I just don't really know what this team is going to be about, because you lost some of the key pieces of last season. You look at, what Joseph Martinez might be able to do with San Jose. I mean, I was watching the Champions Cup last night, and you see Mihailovic score a beauty of a free kick, and you think of what he could still be doing in Montreal if he had stuck around from a few years ago. But the roster just seems like a bit of a weird build, and I don't quite know what to make of this CF Montreal team, Alex.
Yeah, at the same time, this is a CF Montreal team that made the play-in last year, not the playoffs proper. They brought back Laurent Courtois, so some continuity after, just the chopping and changing of Nancy is a great year, but then leaves. And then you have the weird Lasada year. It doesn't go as well. There's finally some continuity. Like, they retained some key pieces, like Joel Waterman being back at the back is going to be huge. He had a big season in terms of just getting, into the national team, and he had some good moments for Montreal. More Jonathan Sirois getting used to Courtois' system. Can he take a big step forward? You look elsewhere on the pitch, Caden Clark being back for a full season, Jaquil Marshall-Rudy, Bryce Duca seemed to really get into this system after struggling at first as the year went on. Can Prince Owusu maybe fit in and replace a Joseph Martinez? Like, I think there's a lot for Montreal in terms of, we also can't forget Veroni. Like, they have a DP that's not Victor Wanyama for the first time in a while. So that's also something a bit different. Like, I think there's enough for Montreal to be an interesting team that pushes for the playoffs. I think it's going to be tough for them just because they lack a ceiling until they fill their DP spots, which we know likely aren't going to happen. But they've done a good job of, like we've mentioned, Moneyball, finding these low value signings, but with high ceilings, high potentials. Guys like Marshall-Rudy, who, if all goes well, he could hit and be a very good player. Especially in this system. So I still think there's enough for Montreal that they can push for the playoffs, especially if they continue to take steps forward. I think this is really where Courtois will show his value, as he did some great things with the Columbus Crew too. And, a lot of people are looking at him as a very similar, higher to Nancy. Well, Nancy really took off with Montreal in his second season. His first season was okay, was good, and then he really took off. Not saying that Montreal is going to hit the heights they hit in 2022, but they can still have a very good season if all goes to plan.
Yeah, I think if Frioni hits, that would be fantastic. We saw him hit a little bit of form with New England last season, but he's not necessarily a consistent player when it comes to MLS, and he's also been one of those DPs that you look at and you hope for a lot more from when you see his resume and his performances in the league. But maybe Montreal, a new place for him, gets him scoring like New England had always hoped he could. But I don't see much happening with the CF Montreal team. Like, it just seems like mid-table, there's not going to be much excitement. And it's going to be kind of like a vanilla, plain, nothing special with it.
We'll see how it plays out. I know it's not exciting, and I think you see that sometimes you get in when it comes to preseason predictions, you get drawn into off seasons. It's like, oh, this team splashed. At the same time, there's a lot of value in MLS to continuity, to chemistry. Like I mentioned earlier, the stat of a lot of coaches doing well when they're in their second, third, fourth seasons. That sort of stuff matters. So I think it's something where even if you look at Montreal, it's not sexy. It's not anything that's going to draw your eyes, especially when you look around, you see Evander coming in and, all these big moves coming to other teams in the East. It's still something where there's a lot of little value there.
We'll jump into MLS predictions as well for each of the Canadian teams, the Whitecaps, CF Montreal, and Toronto FC. If you had to pick a spot for each of these teams to finish in their respective conference, where would you have both Whitecaps, TFC, and CF Montreal if you had to go through it?
Yeah, I mean, you can probably tell based on what I'd said for each. For TFC, I'll start with them. I just think for Robin Fraser, it's going to be about building good habits, just cleaning out whatever the last few years have been, getting Bernadeschi higher up the pitch, Corbianu. I think it's something where I'd probably go like 13th for TFC. Like, they take a bit of a step forward. They maintain the step forward. Maybe they get out from under the Insigne deal, and there's a lot of positivity. At the same time, the East is looking good. There's a lot of movement going on in there. For Montreal, as you can tell, I'm pretty bullish. I'm going to go 8th. I think that continuity of having a coach, I still like. They made the play in last year. I think, why not make the play in again this year? Because they really had some rough moments last year, and they still made the play in. If they can get a little more consistency, not have as nightmare of stretch where it was like 6-7 games where they really like hit the dumps. no reason why they can't push for the play-in. For the Whitecaps, I'm going to go for 6th. So I think it's something where this is ultimately, yes, they lost an Armstrong. Yes, they didn't maybe make as big of a splash as other teams in the league. It's still a team that has Ryan Gauld, Andreas Kubas, and Brian White. Like it's yes, Jesper Sorensen will need to adjust to the league, but they in terms of fit, his style really molds well with this team. So I think 6, something where they're maybe not going to push up the Seattles, the LAFCs, the LA Galaxies of the West, but they're still a team that should be in that middle of the pack, pushing for avoiding the play-in and making the playoffs straight up.
You're more bullish on the Canadian teams than I am. For CF Montreal, I've got 10th. We've heard about my doubts about their roster build, just how things are going to gel together for Montreal. So I've got 10th, just missing that play-in game, of course, the 8 versus 9 game in the Eastern Conference, because I look at the Eastern Conference and it's just, there's a lot of really deep and good and interesting teams in the Eastern Conference, especially with how they improved through the offseason. With TFC, as long as his Insigne is there, even if he's not playing, even if he's not even in the match day squad, I just don't see success for this group. I'm going 14th out of 15 teams in the East. And with the Whitecaps, I think it's going to be pretty similar to last year, maybe a little bit of a step down just because of that Armstrong loss. And I think it's going to take a little bit of time for Sorensen to get used to things. They've got a really tough schedule off the bat. They open the season against the MLS Cup champion LA Galaxy. So I'm going 9th for the Vancouver Whitecaps, and then they'll be in that play-in game once again. So not a great season for the Canadian clubs, but I don't think it's going to be necessarily absolutely terrible for Montreal and the Whitecaps. Of course, the Whitecaps I have making at least the play-in game, if not the playoffs.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of room for movement. I think MLS is very unpredictable. There's always going to be one of the teams that everyone's gassing up that's going to fall off completely. So take your pick. I mean, early returns, you wonder if the LA Galaxy lost too much, right? Like they had to shed so much after a big season. Ricky Puig's out, and we know how good he is. Maybe there'll be some surprise like that. Ditto in the East. Who knows what's going to happen there? And yeah, for the Whitecaps and Montreal, for Montreal continuity, they're just going to have to lean into it. Like use that to your advantage. And for the Whitecaps, yeah, how quickly can Sorensen learn? And I think it really helps Sorensen. He's not coming into a situation where he's got a familiar team. He's got Gauld and White. I think that will help him. But hey, we'll see how it plays out. It's definitely doesn't feel like a year where we'll see all 3 Canadian teams in the playoffs. Heck, even 2 or 1 might be a push. But I definitely feel like we'll get 1. But I say Vancouver for sure. But Montreal really feels like they could swing either way.
And all 3 teams are going to look pretty good this year as well. 3 kits the 3 teams put out, just exceptional across the board. I ranked all 30 over on Sports Illustrated. I had Montreal at 4, Vancouver at 6, Toronto at 8, but 3 Canadian teams in the top 10 for MLS kits. We've got Montreal bringing their black and blue stripes back, the Whitecaps sticking with their hoop identity, as much as I think, the 2017 kind of mountainous look that they had was something that they should have stuck with a bit longer. And Toronto finally brings back the red. It's not a plain red. It's a little bit more of a design, but finally the team that's called the Reds will actually play in red.
Well, this, I guess, dear all teams around the world, because we're having this discussion on Blue Sky. Jeff Salisbury, we're kind of laughing about it. But like, what's beautiful about soccer is that you have your primary kit, and there's color rush games, so to speak, right? Like if there's 2 different colors, you'll have it. You don't need, it's not like certain sports where you need a white and you need a dark. You can have a primary, and you can have these matchups where it's TFC's red against Montreal's black and blue, because why not? As a club, you need to lean into your primary identities. Like I think of Barcelona, I think of the red and blue right away, the Blaugrana. You think of the stripes. You think of Real Madrid, you think of the all white. You think of United, you think of Manchester United, you think of the red, white, and black. Their kits. Like every team in the world, you think about it, at the big ones, you immediately think of something. You have to have your identities. And for the Whitecaps in particular, they're known for their hoop, but then they strayed away from it as they came in MLS. And it was kind of hard to tell what their MLS identity is. And I've loved that they've stuck with the hoop. They're the hoop team, white, with the blue shorts, the blue hoop across the middle. It's recognizable. People know. And then you can have fun with the alternate. They've done blue hoop. They've done sea to sky over the years. They, recently did the 50th anniversary, what looks great. Do that. And I think for TFC, the fact that they didn't have a red kit, while it was really cool, the Onyx kit, in terms of the concept that it was fan designed, I think that would have been a great secondary kit, because I think ultimately you need to be recognizable. And for TFC, that's the red. For Montreal, it's the blue and black. So just so good that all these three teams have visual identities, because maybe they'll help them be less forgotten when it comes to league recognition. And certainly we've seen it with the predictions and other signs that sometimes they get forgotten. Maybe visual identity, as small as it might seem, could be a part of that.
If you, I imagine, took a look at all the MLS kits, at least briefly, what was your favorite out of all 30 new MLS kits? 34, because San Diego had 2 and Miami had 2, of course.
Wow. I can't say I looked too closely at most of them this year. I haven't been in too much of a sicko mode, but the one that stood out, Seattle Sounders, they knocked that out the park, like just in terms of the Salish Sea kit, and the fact that they leaned in some local indigenous art. I think that's going to be one that's going to be a hot sell, and they've done so well, like the Jimi Hendrix kit. I know you own that one. Then they got the Bruce Lee kit. Like they've done so well to pull these out. So I'm going to just shout out the Seattle Sounders is the one that stood out.
Yeah, that's the one that stood out for me too, except I do like Atlanta's full setup, because they've got one of the red stripes on their kit that goes down to the shorts and kind of curves around the shorts, which you just don't see before. It looks almost, indoor soccer-y, like it looks like it belongs in the major arena soccer league, not MLS, but it's kind of fun. And I do like it a little bit, but yeah, I think Seattle really knocked it out of the park with theirs, and I might have to own 2 Seattle jerseys, and I never thought I'd say that, having grown up a Vancouver Whitecaps supporter. But we'll jump into the Northern Super League as well. Training camps continue, but there was another signing by AFC Toronto who brought in Maya Jones on low. And from Matt Paternostra, have all NSL teams found a training ground, and where are they? And for Maya Jones as well, is this a player that you think can succeed in the NSL, unlike the levels she hit in the NWSL?
Well, considering she was like a pretty regular starter in the NWSL as the year went on, like starting, got a lot of 60-minute cameos, really had a good moment in the Champions Cup at the end of the year. Like, I think this is a good move for Toronto to bring her in. I feel like this is someone who I would have thought, sticks around the NWSL, pushes for a bigger role. But if this is a sign of the level of the league in year one, you saw Emma Reagan. There's another signing, Victoria Pickett. This Toronto team not messing around, and I think they really could set the tone for the level of the league. And I think Jones on top of that, it's a very shrewd signing, since you're bringing it as a loan. Maybe it's not one of the DP spots. I like what's going on there. In terms of the training ground question, I imagine all of it, because training camps kicked off. I know for Vancouver, they've been training. UBC is the goal, but of course there was some snow to start training camp, so they went up to the Windsor bubble, which was a bit of an interesting move in terms of facilities. But I think that's the one advantage the Rise are going to have. I mean, we know how world class the facilities are at UBC, and that's going to be curious to see what a lot of the other teams do. Like, I imagine like Toronto, Halifax, a lot of them just going to be training on like your home pitch whenever the opportunity frees up. I'll be curious to see what Calgary and Ottawa in particular do in their situations.
Yeah, from the sounds of it, Toronto's been in a bubble up at York University. They've got the field covered there, and that seems pretty well grounded where they are. I'm not so sure about sort of permanent training grounds, ability to leave your gear at the training facility overnight, which I know was a problem for York United in the past at York University. But for the other teams, I'm not completely confident on where they're training. I know that the Calgary Wild are training at the University of Calgary in a bubble there. But the snow, of course, creating major obstacles for most teams, even Vancouver at this point. So it will be a very bubble heavy start to training camp. And I wouldn't even be surprised if, it's bubble heavy training sessions to start the season as well, with the games, of course, outside, not in a bubble. But a question from Cliff Jameson on the CPL as well. League One Quebec has recently expanded threefold with the development of LSEQ and has introduced a new 3-tier setup. Should League One BC and League One Alberta look to take similar steps with their provincial senior amateur leagues? I wouldn't like it, because I think League One BC has to remain as a developmental step within the Canadian soccer pyramid, whereas leagues like the VMSL should remain senior amateur as what they are. They're not necessarily that developmental step in the same way.
Yeah, well, I think in BC in particular, they're going to have to, figure out. There is going to have to be some questions there, though, because like there have also been some issues in the sense that a lot of VMSL players playing League One and vice versa. And then it complicates things when VMSL teams make nationals. And I know there's some rules last year about eligibility for, the league that versus VMSL, which made things very complicated. So I think there's some discussions to be had. I think Quebec's going to be a good test case. And I think that's what's interesting with League One is that like we're kind of seeing test case, like in League One Ontario, we're seeing what relegation could look like. And so far it's been very interesting. And, I think a lot of the other provinces will probably look at, okay, if once we get the right numbers, that's a model worth following. Well, Quebec could be an example, either good or bad, of what can happen when you integrate the amateur leagues in, because the amateur leagues play a huge role. There's a lot of talent, a lot of young players. That's how they get their start when they're 14, 15. They make that step up into these amateur leagues. So if there's a way to embed it all into the same system, obviously that would be a nice goal. But sometimes, as we know, those sorts of things are easier said than done. So I think Quebec could be a very good test ground, especially for BC, given some of the complications out here.
The Canadian women's national team also getting their debut with Casey Stoney on the touchline. A 1-1 draw with China to start things off. Alex, what do you see from this match? Of course, we saw Julia Grosso get the first goal of the Casey Stoney era.
Yeah, we saw Casey Stoney ball. She promised that we're going to see some styles, some things that really make it obvious we're watching Casey Stoney ball, and we saw it. It was interesting at first to see the first lineup. They got the stiffest test right away, China. So a 1-1 draw, not bad. Definitely one where, if you're looking at the result, they'll feel like they should have gotten a win, but at the same time, it's a friendly. You're testing things. I thought it was interesting. Stoney went a little more vet heavy, in the sense like we didn't see Olivia Smith, we didn't see some of these other younger players slot in, like a Simio Wujo, etc. But still, we saw some players we want to see more of. We saw Gabby Carl start, looked great, gets the assist on Grosso's goal. We saw Grosso play a big role. Emma Reagan was fantastic in the middle of the park, arguably my player of the match, and then she had to drop back to right back and didn't look out of place. We see Janine Sonis. We're gonna have to get used to saying that. I know the commentary too. They were struggling with that at times, and it's going to take some used to. But Sonis looking like the Janine Sonis we're used to seeing, with the deliveries down the right. Even same player, just a different name on the back of the jersey. So that was good and promising. Aladou comes in, was playing a bit of an interesting role. But yeah, no, I think we saw what we're going to see from this team. It's going to be direct, a lot of balls over the top to the strikers, which was something that Evelyn Vien was a bit off with in this game, but we know she thrives on that kind of service. And there's a lot of service out wide, which is good given the players Canada have who can cross a ball on top of Sonis. We know Lawrence can cross. We know Carl can cross. We know some of these other wide players are really good at getting the ball in the box.
When you look at Aladou's performance as well, a bit of an interesting role. Started kind of on the left, but was drifting in a lot of the time. Wasn't playing that 10 role that Casey Stoney was so adamant that she saw Marie-Yasmin Aladou as. But what did you see from Aladou in this debut?
I like the idea, but I just don't think Ashley Lawrence was the right fit behind her. I get what Stoney was doing by playing Lawrence on the left and Carl on the right. Look, I'm not the biggest inverted fullbacks kind of guy, but it works because Carl's really good at it as an inverted fullback. She plays there for Washington. She's good on her left, good on her right. Lawrence is a good inverted fullback, but naturally when she plays a little inverted, she doesn't push forward as much. And Carl already was playing a little deeper. And it worked with the Carl and Becky because Sonis, there we go. So Sonis stretches out on the right and Carl tucks in a little more. It works. What happened on the left was Lawrence would kind of tuck in, Aladou would tuck in, and there'd be no one providing width. And I think that took away from a bit of both of their games. So I would like to see something adjusted there where if Aladou is going to play in that role, I think she can really fit in it because she can drift inside, find space, but I'd like an overlapping threat beyond her so that player can open up space, because it felt like it was easy to mark Aladou because it'd be like, oh, Lawrence isn't pushing forward. We can kind of cheat a little more and cover Aladou. So little tweaks that I'm sure Stoney will be looking at when she reviews the film tape.
When you're looking at these next two games for the women's national team as well, what kind of changes would you want to see? Of course, we saw D'Angelo get the start in net today. She looked okay in the saves that she was forced into. But what kind of things do you want to see from Stoney in the next two games?
Yeah, I mean, just little adjustments in terms of those partnerships. Okay, Sonis Carl could be one. Build on that a little more. experiment to find other ways, such as like Aladu. Is there someone at left back who could get a role? Of course, see some new faces. We saw Samantha Chang come on in the second half of this game. She looked pretty good, which was good to see for the Vancouver Rise player. To see 2 NSL players already in the first game under Stoney between her and Reagan is cool. We saw Ella Audi come in, which is good. You want to see, some more involvement from some of the youngsters. So yeah, hopefully just more of that. Olivia Smith came in as a cameo. I'd love to see her start. I'd love to see what kind of role Stoney sees for her. Is it going to be more of a 9-10 winger? Maybe she's the winger that someone like her and Aladu could maybe link up nicely down that left side. And of course, I want to see some more Simia Wujo. But considering like Jessie Fleming didn't even see the field, or at least she didn't start in this game, it shows that Stoney still is going to have a lot to work with.
Certainly will be exciting to see what Casey Stoney is able to build with this Canadian women's national team through the remainder of the Pinatar Cup. But that's all we've got here for episode 216 of the Northern Futbol Podcast. He's been Brendan Dunlop and Alex Gongi-Ruzik, and I've been Ben Steiner. Thanks so much for tuning in. Make sure to rate, review, subscribe, and follow at all your podcast platforms. And you can, of course, watch us on the 90th Minute YouTube channel as well. Thanks so much, and we'll be back next time.